I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are really excited to introduce our first digital roundtable talking about external forces that influence formulating. And we have with us today Professor Dr. K.P. Ananth, who is the director of the Cosmetic Science program at the University of Cincinnati, along with Penny Anderson, Ava Perkins, and Stephanie Rodriguez. Now, Penny is a current student in the MS Cosmetic Science program. Ava is doing her PhD in Pharm Sciences and has a BS in Cosmetic Science from Toledo. And Stephanie just graduated from the University of Cincinnati MS program last spring. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Rachel. Really very happy to be here.
Thank you.
My name, as you said, is KP Ananth. I am director and professor of cosmetic science at the University of Cincinnati. I have been here for about 8 years, and prior to that, I spent almost 33 years in the industry. I'm really happy to be here to talk about external forces that influence formulating.
Well, I think with that, we'll go ahead and jump into some questions to start this discussion. I think probably everyone is feeling it, and maybe some of you younger folks have grown up with it, but the idea is social media, right? It's newer maybe for someone of my Gen Xer status, but I'm wondering, I'd like to get your take on how social media has impacted cosmetic product development, good, bad, or otherwise. So maybe Ananth, you could start us off with this one.
Yeah, certainly. Social media has a significant impact, I think, on formulations and technologies that are coming out. Most of them are in a positive way, but it can also go wrong the wrong way depending upon how the information is transmitted and so on. But certainly things like, for example, the general trend about moving towards sustainability and greener technologies and so on, all those pushes come through consumer desired, future technologies. They have been pushing these things, and those are all instantly communicated to others through social media. The ability of social media to communicate instantly, to all over the world, to millions of people, makes a huge difference in terms of how the companies respond as well as how the people respond and so on. Yeah. The positive thing is obviously things like sustainable technologies and greener technologies and so on. The negative is when it comes to things like misinformation that can also happen very, very quickly, that gets spread very rapidly. The question is, how do you sort of manage the positives of this sort of social media versus some of the negatives that could come? And this is an area I think that requires a lot more attention in the future. One of the things that can be done is all about really, educating people in terms of what is the source of that information. Should you be looking at it more carefully? Is that supported by scientific evidence and so on? That kind of scrutiny is required to really, make full use of the social media power in a positive direction and to develop new technologies and new sciences.
Great.
Please chime in.
Yeah. I think Penny, we have you up next.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Ananth for sure. I think it's an excellent tool for marketing and demonstrations, and particularly like a diagnostic to help with, instant feedback around information in the industry.
Great. Ava, you want to chime in on that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both of you. Social media is definitely positive in that it's giving brands a lot more visibility in a way that they would have a lot more struggle with if they were trying to go maybe the more traditional route, especially we see on TikTok or products go viral all the time. And I heard it's like, it's the new seasonal, everything is just so in your face all the time. But also, speaking from personal experience, like I personally make content on social media talking about cosmetic science and educating consumers, which is really fun. But at the same time, I really see how misinformation spreads like wildfire. And it's extremely frustrating, I think, for us in the industry, because we're seeing the industry go in a direction that we know is not true. And it's, like I said, extremely frustrating because we see even medical professionals, people with medical degrees, talk about things that are just not true because it gets them more clicks or it gets them brand deals. And it's just extremely frustrating for formulators too, because we're having to now adapt to things that just aren't scientifically true. So it's a double-edged sword. I believe social media is a really great thing for brands for their visibility, but at the same time is also harming the cosmetic industry in a way that I don't think we really know how to handle yet.
Well, that's a fair point. Stephanie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that everybody has said, but it's evident though that people still want one single platform that they can refer to get all of their answers. Like I do see a lot of viral videos about certain apps that are out there right now where you can just scan a barcode and get a score, so to speak, for neutrality or how green something is or clean or, you know, the whole line of marketing terms. So people want that, right? But when a video like that goes viral, then everybody wants to download the app and all of a sudden they're all using it. But the information on that app might not necessarily be encompassing every single factor that should be taken into consideration. So, you know, people hold things at face value on social media, and that might not necessarily be the best route to go all the time.
Yeah, and I just might chime in here too, think that I see this this emergence of the scientific communicator role coming out of this kind of discussion, because there's sort of that need to, I don't know, temper what's being said out there, or at least kind of help guide. Are you guys seeing, you know, the same things, Anand?
I think that is extremely important. Yeah, just to elaborate on a couple of points that were discussed. For example, when you talk about something like, say, sulfate free or silicone free and so on, people take it literally, and that goes to the entire class of chemicals. So sulfates, for example, something like sodium sulfate is so innocuous and no problem at all, and people start worrying about having sulfate somewhere there, whatnot. Yeah, the same way when you talk about preservative free. And we should realize that most of our products have water. When you have water, it is likely to get microbial contamination. And so you cannot quite go preservative free in the sense that consumers are looking for. There has to be some way of controlling microbial growth in these products to make them safer for people and so on. Yeah. So clearly those things are very, very important. Yeah. So this is why I think education is one of the best things. And communication becomes very, very important. So not only qualified professionals stating their credentials and background, talking about in an authoritative way with scientific evidence, saying that this is what is right and this is what may be misinformation and so on. Correcting those things is very important. Companies, on the other hand, often try to take the easier path of trying to follow the consumer demand and try to come up with 10 different products which are, say, sulfate-free or preservative-free and so on, rather than trying to educate them in terms of what the issues are and so on. I think this is where I think companies can also play a major role in educating consumers, saying, here is the scientific evidence, here is why you need these things, here is how products are manufactured, or here is how formulations are put together and so on. Yeah. So that type of information to social media is absolutely critical, so that just like Stephanie was mentioning, we need to have some reliable sources. For example, when you talk about medical things, we try to go to some authorities, for example, to get some, some kind of either coming from, Harvard or some places like that, which are known for their credentials and so on. The same way, I think we need to have some authoritative way of actually communicating information rather than just coming from anyone who can put something together on social media.
No, good points. Anyone else want to? Go ahead.
I agree to that 100%. And I think this is where, scope of practice really becomes important. I feel like with dermatologists and cosmetic chemists, there's definitely a lot of overlap in terms of talking about products, but sometimes I see one party jumping into the scope of practice of another, and that's not necessarily appropriate. And like I said, some people are more likely to listen to a doctor rather than a scientist because they have a medical degree, and that's just that. I'm definitely agree with Dr. Anand too, in terms of like education is super extremely important, but it's also important to consider the attention span of the viewers watching things on social media. I'm definitely victim to this. Like my attention span has definitely gone down a lot since downloading TikTok. And honestly, the time it takes to explain sometimes a scientific concept, just like how sulfates, they're a class of ingredients. It's not just a single ingredient. You can also formulate things in a way that would make sulfates more gentle, blah, 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 blah. That takes a lot more time to explain than somebody saying sulfates are bad for you, sulfates are toxic, and that's going to get a lot more attention than, somebody in the scientific community explaining that. So I think it's like a way, something that I guess science communicators need to take into consideration of like, okay, how can I explain these things in a way that makes sense, but in a way that doesn't take 5 minutes, because people are not going to hang around for that long.
Yeah.
I think that's why it becomes extremely important to actually educate the opinion formers and the doctors and the dermatologists and so on. So having that, type of interprofessional type of interactions to communicate to other groups there who can actually influence these things, that becomes very, very important.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Stephanie, you had a comment?
Yeah, just jumping off of what Ava was saying, I mean, I've read this before. I don't necessarily know if it's true, but they say that the TikTok videos that can grab your attention within the first 7 seconds are the ones that will actually do well on the app. So if you're not grabbing people's attention within those first few seconds of the video, it's not going to do well. It's not going to go viral. And, going off of that from how it's impacting the formulators, now we have to come up with these formulas that work or show results in the first minute even. And, it's constantly forcing us to have to push this envelope of immediate efficacy, but maybe it's kind of driving the focus in the wrong direction. Are we even concerned with long-term results anymore? Is that even something that consumers want?
Yeah, good points. Penny, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move along?
I think it's a fun conduit for feedback, which is what we are kind of emphasizing here, but it's not for fact finding. So, you really want to have, your scientific evidence under the right level of scrutiny, and completely agree with Stephanie around instant gratification. And that's a challenge for formulators in today's age, because we need to have products that have instant effect as well as long-term biological benefits. So, yeah, totally agree.
Great point. I think we'll move along maybe to the next point then. I'd love to get your intake on, or your insights on regulations now, like thinking about the regulatory constraints that are imposed on formulators. How do those impact or eventually impact cosmetic product development? And then how might formulators adapt? Ananth, you want to start us?
Again, the formulation regulations are changing all over the world, right? For example, in the US, we are talking about MOCRA, Modernization of Cosmetic Regulations Act, that is coming up, and everybody's watching very carefully to see what that actually involves. Regulations are changing in EU and so on. They are different in different countries. Sunscreen regulations are changing dramatically. There are only, just a couple of ingredients now that are considered as grass or green and approved, whereas if you look at number of organic sunscreen, they are all in scrutiny right now. So there are lots of issues there in terms of ingredients and so on. These are all because of regulations. Microplastics, even though the issue has been kind of promoted because they have been removed from products and so on, there are generally issues about polymers that, because again, people don't understand the difference between plastic and polymers, for example, and so on. Yeah. So there are lots of misinformation that are around in terms of these things that also need to be addressed as well as a part of the regulations that they are coming through. Yeah. I look at it as a challenge and an opportunity for formulators, because this gives them a huge opportunity to look at something new, something different. And it is not usually just replacing an ingredient with something else. I think we should start looking at it from a fresh eye, saying that what is the minimum number of ingredients that I need to achieve a certain function? So start putting together, a formulation that requires all the minimum things to make that formulation work, rather than trying to take out one ingredient and put something else in. So that's probably the best way to go from formulators' point of view. And it's a huge opportunity for formulators. And it's a great challenge. I think it's a great opportunity. That's the way I would look at it, rather than worrying about it as an issue. And again, I think something like MOCRA, I believe, will affect smaller manufacturers and entrepreneurs, and even some of the medical doctors and dermatologists are getting into making their own skin line and so on. And obviously, safety becomes a major concern, environmental impact becomes a major concern, and so on. So I think the MOCRA will have a lot more impact, whereas the bigger companies like P&G, Unilever, and so on, they will know how to address these things pretty well, and they are getting ready for that very well. Yeah. So I think regulations will have an impact in the coming years, but regulations also offer some great opportunities for formulators to bring in their skills and bring in new ingredients.
That's seeing the silver lining. I like that. Penny, you want to chime in on that too?
Yeah, I want to jump off of what Dr. Anna said, particularly because global regulations are not harmonized. So when you look at, say, the sunscreen category, we are now moving towards GRAS status with the 2 mineral-based sunscreens, the inorganic sunscreens. But around the world, the regulations in terms of the concentrations of actives for chemical sunscreens versus physical, they're different. So, for example, in the EU, you can use 5% avobenzone, a UVA protectant, where you cannot use that in the United States. So I think the challenge that it brings is trying to find a common ground, a global, nationally recognized product that is stable from a preservative perspective, that's globally compliant, that also can be universally accepted. So I think Dr. Anth really brought that in around finding that common ground around the challenge that you need to face in terms of a formulator and understanding new things with the different regulations, but understanding that there needs to be a huge amount of scrutiny around that development in terms of stability and making sure that it's a efficacious product that meets all the needs of all the consumers worldwide.
Great points. Ava, what do you think about regulations?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Dr. Nath and Penny so far, but I kind of want to come at this at a different perspective and argue that sometimes the retailers are serving as like unofficial regulatory bodies, and that their clean lists or their certifications to, achieve their clean status. It's a laundry list of ingredients, and it just keeps growing. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure like Walmart added phenoxyethanol to their list recently, or a few other things, and so it's causing formulators to have to reformulate their ingredient or their products off a basis that isn't really backed by much science or is cherry-picked science. And so I think it's frustrating in that sense, in addition to all the other global regulations having to follow that too, or, even just the argument too, that if one state bans an ingredient, then the whole rest of the country has to do that. So even though it's not technically, banned by the FDA or banned in the EU, it kind of is if you want to sell it worldwide, or at least within the United States.
Yeah. What about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, just piggybacking off of where you want to sell your products, you could start as a small brand in the US, and then next thing you know, you want to start expanding, and all of a sudden you have to consider, is your product China compliant? That's a really big thing that I keep hearing from suppliers. You're like, hey, do you need China compliant ingredients? And we're like, oh, thankfully not, or maybe yes, we do. But yeah, I mean, a good tool from a formulator point of view is there's a program called Novi Connect, and I'm sure that there are others out there right now where you can kind of input the name of the ingredient you need and apply whatever regulatory things that you're looking for, like Cosmos Organic, EcoCert, stuff like that. And it can generate a list of ingredients with suppliers that actually provide that particular ingredient that follows those regulatory compliance needs that you need. And so from a formulator aspect, stuff like that has been really helpful. But as soon as you input this one ingredient that needs to follow these 3 different compliance things and you can't find one, now all of a sudden it becomes a new challenge for you. So it's fun, but challenging.
It does bring you back down to, as Nanth was saying, kind of the minimalist approach. Like, what do you actually really need in there? Because it makes you think more and harder, I would assume, I'm not a formulator, but about each of the pieces that are going in there, and how can you, put them together in a way that maybe they help each other synergistically. I'm assuming that you get into the chemistry of that and think about ways that you could enhance that. Is that an assumption to make?
Certainly a great opportunity, because typically what happens in a company is that join a company and they're making, say, a certain formulation for hair care or for skin care or something. You're given a formula and said, here is how the recipe is, how to make this particular product, and I want to change ingredient A, B, and C into this. Or the typical approach is, okay, let's take out the A, B, C and put something else in and see how that works. And that is, without really much thinking into it in terms of how the formulation works. Instead, here is my functional thing that I want to achieve, and here are the minimum ingredients that I need, and how do I put it together? So having the fresh look at that time is a great opportunity to actually come up with better ways. Otherwise, you'll keep on adding ingredients to an existing list of 20 ingredients, right? So that doesn't really get you to a better formulation often. And so start from scratch, start with a piece of paper saying, what do I need and what do I need to do? It's a great opportunity for formulators, actually. Yeah.
Anyone want to add to that? As you're saying that, I'm also thinking about the idea of leveraging AI, because I know that's something else the industry is talking about, to kind of do some of those calculations for you. Are you guys playing with that a little bit, or are you able to implement that maybe when it comes to trying to come back into that regulatory safe place?
I mean, AI is a great tool in terms of starting off with an initial formulation. It may give you some ideas about it. But I don't think AI is going to replace actual formulation work in terms of doing that and see how that comes out. Because there are so many other variables out there. AI has got only information what we have fed into it. It sort of puts it all together and brings it back in a way that maybe, attractive to you to sort of given point. And so I would say use AI as a starting point, but don't rely on it AI, completely. You should think about still what ingredients you are putting into formulation. Why are they there?
Mhm.
And do I need it? Because the AI information is all information coming from what has been developed over the years. If you
Mhm.
want to look at a fresh look, start from the scratch, start from science, see whether you need it or not. Yeah.
Mhm.
So AI is a great tool. I'm not discouraging anybody from using AI, but I think use it judiciously and in a way that will help you in your overall thinking.
Mhm.
But put your thinking hat always when you're trying to develop a new formulation.
That's a good point. Anyone else have a comment there? Stephanie, it looked like you might.
Yeah, so I work in a lab with some analytical chemists, right? So they don't necessarily understand or know what I do. But we had this discussion a few weeks ago, actually, about whether or not AI could eventually replace what I do. And so, they asked AI to generate a formulation for a cream. And while, like Anand said, it does kind of give you like a standard formula that you can work off of, it's never going to go into the amount of detail that a formulator will be able to, and it will never be able to really say, oh, this feels great on my skin. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's a good tool for sure. And it does help with understanding what certain ingredients do and their activity in a formula. But I think there's a long way to go. And actually going back to the whole idea of MOCRA, I don't necessarily know where this is going to go, but we are inputting all of our formulations and ingredients into a specific database. And who knows if in the future they might use that for AI purposes.
Yeah. Penny, did you have anything to add there? Or?
Oh, just about the AI piece, I think,
Yeah.
in that I think formulation is a very empirical science. I mean, there's certainly theoretical aspects as well, but that really shows the value of experimentation. And typically when you're trying to drive towards solving a problem for the skin or addressing a problem for the skin, it takes many iterations of experimentation to understand that stability and the performance of that product. So AI agreed that it's a starting point and you can get a great deal of information from it. We still cannot replace the value of experimentation that's necessary. And it's necessarily for drug stability anyway. Over-the-counter drug products, you must perform that. So yeah, just to piggyback on that.
Yeah, interesting. Ava, just before we move on, you have any other additional thoughts there?
We don't. No, I think you guys covered it. I agree in the sense that AI should be used in assistance with, a formulator or an expert in the industry. I think that can only help, not hurt. So
Great. Okay. Well, I want to move us along maybe to the next thought, which is really broad. So I'm going to let you lead us a little, but I wanted to know maybe more in terms of technical constraints as an external influence that's sort of impeding maybe progress when it comes to formulating. Are there certain types of technical problems that you always run into, that you always face? And are they different maybe from what they were 5 or 10 years ago? And if so, maybe talk about that difference a little bit. What do you think, Anant, about those technical constraints?
I mean, when it comes to technical constraints and formulators, it's a very interesting problem because formulators only think that they can solve everything, right? Because they can think about possibilities and try out various things and so on. Yeah, but certainly there is some truth to it in the sense that the opportunities are right now. People are struggling with using more naturals, more sustainable materials, and going more preservative-free and so on. Yeah, all these are challenges because when you talk about naturals, first of all, naturals are much more prone to bacterial contamination. They are much more prone to issues. That's why people went to synthetic materials. For example, naturals, even the sourcing and the specification can change probably from season to season, climate to climate, country to country, and so on. It's a huge variation in that sourcing. Secondly, again, just like what I mentioned, you cannot throw this into a formulation and expect the formulation to work. So here again, the technical constraints are sometimes so overwhelming that we may want to change our product expectation, in the sense that sometimes sensory may not be exact, like what is needed, for example, in a conventional product. And for example, when you talk about sunscreens, the other day I was out there and trying to use some sunscreen because I was working in the yard, and I applied one of the sunscreens on my face, and all of a sudden it looked like I had put paint on my face. right? Because it was, zinc oxide, titanium dioxide based materials. Even though we have materials that we have identified as being grass and so on, formulating those things can be a challenge. You need to have it in something that people will apply and reapply and so on. If they are sensorially not pleasing, nobody's going to use it, right? So again, there are significant challenges in terms of formulators, in terms of what they can do. Preservative-free is an example, another one. And one of the things that PCPC identified recently was when people are switching to natural products, they were seeing increased incidence of microbial contamination in plant-produced products. That means all these products, when they're developed in the lab, looked very clean, they passed all the microbial tests and so on. But when you go to the factory, they fail. Part of the reason is because the current factories are designed to deal with the conventional type of chemicals, and they are much more forgiving in that respect. So when you go to something somewhat weaker, somewhat natural and so on, which are not as efficacious, what you find is that the plants are not as forgiving anymore. And in the process, you end up with contamination. When you have a contamination in the plant, that's a huge cost issue, in the sense that you've got to clean the entire plant, you've got to get rid of all the product and make sure that everything is microbially clean, and then start off with a new batch. And that is time consuming, that is costing and so on. And one of the things PC identified, along with many other things, was actually to look at more trained hygienists, plant hygienists in this area. That's one of the reasons we actually started a graduate certificate program in hygienic manufacturing, for example. So these are all the challenges that the industry is going to face. From formulators' point of view, that means how do we find something that is going to be much more efficacious and at the same time will withstand all the issues that may come in the plant and so on, yeah. And so the issues are on one side challenging. On the other hand, there are great opportunities for formulators to think more broadly and take a fresh look at formulations much more differently than what they are used to do normally. Yeah. So I think technical constraints are there, but they are excellent opportunities.
Points. Penny, what are your thoughts on technical constraints?
Yeah, I think one of the points that Dr. Aneth made, or that really resonated the most with me, is around trying to address multiple factors with a formula in terms of faster acting performance per se, or in maybe long-term hydration, say in a hand sanitizer at really low cost. So trying to address all these factors together with global compliance at a very low cost that's consumer accepted is an extreme challenge, and it continues to grow. But it also gives us this opportunity to kind of think about how can we make a product more distinguished in the industry where it has benefits that are differentiating. So it's this multiple factors, I think, that really seem to be a huge challenge in my world right now as a formulator. And sometimes I have a cost target of 5 cents per ounce, which is less than the cost of bottled water.
Figure that out, right?
Yep.
That's wild. Oh my gosh.
Add your thoughts, Ava.
Yeah, that's it. No, I'm just kidding. No, definitely like building off of what you guys had just mentioned, the drive towards more clean and natural products. Consumers are expecting the same performance from those types of products too, except without the ingredients that provide that performance. So it's definitely a little bit of a struggle in terms of, trying to achieve that. But like Dr. Aneth has mentioned a few times, it's also kind of like silver lining because it keeps formulators in a job. And it's also, a challenge that they can overcome, which is great. But also, adding to what Penny had said, this economy is not fantastic right now. And, costs of materials are not ideal, and supply chain has been an issue for a while. So having to just take all those factors into consideration to create a product that, performs the same, costs less, achieves, long-term efficacy, it's really a challenge. And honestly, I'm not really sure how we combat that, if I'm being completely honest, at least the way that the direction this industry is going right now.
You're like forensic scientists trying to find this puzzle, like that's how
Literally,
I envision
yeah.
it. And it's really,
We're
you have all the
magicians.
clues. Yeah, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe that's it. Stephanie, what about you? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It definitely takes a lot of creativity to try and figure out how you're going to accomplish a certain goal. And it is tough, for example, biosurfactants, they are probably the closest thing that you can get to purely natural, but as far as how well they build in viscosity or how stable they might be in a formulation, it's a completely different ballpark from something as your standard SLS or SLES. So when you're approaching a natural formula and trying to meet these consumer demands, you're going to have to jump through those hurdles and try to figure out how to make it work. But, going back to what we said earlier, maybe less is more. Maybe just trying to do the most with a little amount of what you have is probably the best way to go in today's world.
Oh, good points. Now, does anyone want to comment, piggyback off of
I mean,
something there? Ananth?
Just again, this idea of expectation from consumers in terms of what property they would like to see in a product based on what they are used to. That's an area where I think, again, education can make a difference here. I think that it is not the sensory that's going to, solve all your problems there. If you want something sustainable, you may have to sort of sacrifice something else, and you may find something else more useful and interesting as well. Those kind of educational things that may help. And so again, consumer education is the best way to advance those challenges that are very, very difficult to overcome. And that comes particularly for preservative-free type of ideas, saying that it is important to preserve products that are against microbial contamination. Otherwise, it's going to be a safety issue. And how do I do it with the most efficacious material that's natural and not harming? I mean, that's the area of research, and that's the area of opportunity for formulators and so on. Yeah, but education is an integral part of the whole process, rather than just trying to do everything in the lab. Yeah.
Yeah. Penny or Ava or Stephanie, did you have a piggyback comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is really where marketing comes in, especially if products are starting to lack a little bit in performance. This is where marketing needs to start getting a little bit creative. And with that, hopefully comes consumer education as well.
Did you have something, Penny? Sorry.
Oh, I think I just want to add from what Stephanie said previously about the 7 seconds in terms of the TikTok attention and the instant gratification. That is a technical constraint, I think, for developing formulas for universal skin tones as well. So when you think about all the different skin tones and ethnicities in the world and how our consumers are expecting an instant effect as well as a long-term biological benefit, trying to grab that together into a formula and making sure that it's balanced and it performs stable and it's efficacious is a huge challenge for us. So that instant gratification and instant effects, say optical diffusers or skin tone matching, combined with, say, long-term biological benefits, is a big challenge. But it's a fun one, because when you can find a solution that does address those factors, usually it's differentiating.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Stephanie, did you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the education piece, it's going to be very difficult, because I truly see it as needing to be coming from a huge player in the market. If P&G dedicated the next year to just pushing educational material, all of our problems would be solved, you know what I mean? But are they ever going to do that? Probably not. So we might have to rely on, brands maybe that are in Sephora or Ulta, maybe if even Fenty Beauty dedicated a few products to trying to educate consumers. I definitely think it would have to start from definitely a big player in the market before it'll eventually trickle down.
It's a very interesting idea. I like that. I want to move us along just to kind of a final thought here from everyone. I'd love to know, just looking ahead, do you have a projection maybe, or a prediction for maybe some other external forces that might come into play here moving down the road that'll affect product formulating? What do you predict? Ananth, do you have thoughts there?
I mean, there are obviously external factors that we are currently sort of talking about. They will have a bigger role, I think, as we go forward. For example, MOCRA is, something that's coming on board, and we don't really know what the implications are for manufacturers and so on. Yeah, so that's going to be a big factor in terms of influencing formulations, and as you go forward. Yeah, AI is going to be here. It's not going to go away anywhere. The question is, how do you use it more in a favorable way? And this is what I think, something that Penny mentioned earlier, basically that our ability to measure things and transmit information, that has advanced so much. And now we can really talk about individualized product type of thing. For example, you can look at skin condition, because it can be transmitted through wearable type of technologies and so on that will allow you to sort of decide how much moisturizer should someone have or something very special. For example, depending upon the skin condition, if somebody has got atopic dermatitis or something, what kind of product may be milder for skin and so on. It's possible to sort of custom make those sort of things there. And that's where the AI can play a bigger role, I think. And that's going to be there. That's not going to go away. So use it in a positive way where consumers will actually benefit from those sort of things. Yeah. Again, going back to our ability to measure things, that's leading to new ingredients, identification of new materials, and so on. That will continue. That's not going to go away. So it's a huge opportunity for formulators to deliver materials more effectively, especially when we are dealing in that cosmeceutical area, where we want to look at some more stronger biological benefits, but with cosmetic claims and so on. And here's a huge area, I think, in terms of natural materials. So, for example, things like bakuchiol that are coming up as a potential replacement for things like retinol and things like that. Yeah, there are many more such opportunities. So that area is going to go, in a big way in the coming years. Yeah, so formulating them, delivery of those actives and so on will continue to play. Sunscreen areas will continue to be a major thing. In addition to, sunscreen actives, or the boosters that one can use so that it can get overall benefit to skin. That's going to be an area of research in terms of antioxidants and other type of materials and so on, so that we are not limited by the approved type of sunscreen actives, and we can broaden and enhance benefits there. That may be an area that could be. Other area I see is more along the segment-specific type of technologies, in the sense that these are now more like people of different ethnicities and different color and different skin types and different climatic conditions and so on. Are there products that can be tailored to those conditions? For example, we know that when it is very cold and dry, the skin condition gets always worse, for example. There are extremes when you have hot and dry as well. The same way, when you go to very high temperature and highly humid conditions, you end up with different set of problems and so on. So I think segment-specific type of things will continue to be there very much in the coming years. Yeah. And other area I always talk about is sensitive skin. We don't really know what sensitive skin is even now, right? We've got sensitivity to different type of ingredient, different type of materials, and so on. Yeah, there is a lot of research going on these days. And hopefully, I think we'll have some better understanding of what sensitive skin is and how to address them and so on. Yeah, these are all potential areas. And the two other areas I always talk about, one is a very aged skin, very elderly skin. People with, 70 to 100, people are living longer and longer. And we don't understand that skin very well because the biology is sort of weakened in those cases. How do I sort of make the skin to make better barrier under those conditions? What kind of ingredients are needed to kick up that biology, for example, and so on. Yeah, are there opportunities there? That'll be an area again for formulators to come up with new ingredient, scientists to farm up with, and again, actives that will actually help build that barrier better. The other extreme is infant skin. A lot of research in the recent days seem to suggest that protecting that barrier during the first couple of years can actually reduce the incidence of things like atopic dermatitis and associated things like food allergy and a number of other things that happen later on in life. Because once you get AD, this sort of translates into different forms at different stages. Yeah. So if you can protect that skin barrier better, I think you've got a huge opportunity here to reduce potential problems later on. Yeah. So all these are areas of active research at the moment. I'm sure there'll be more and more technologies that are coming out. And all those will be opportunities, I think, from formulators' point of view as well as technology point of view.
There are a lot of great insights and projections for us. What can we add to that? Penny, do you have some thoughts on future challenges that might influence us?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Dr. Aneth emphasized the importance of barrier. And I think one part of that, too, is around the microbiome. There's a huge movement around microbiome and really balancing the microbiota of the skin in a damaged state and understanding that depending on what that condition is, because there's an invisible barrier there as well in terms of good and bad bacteria and how it works for you or against you under different conditions. So designing products that help support the microbiome in the right way and for specific health conditions like atopic dermatitis is a booming area. It's an emerging area. And then I think there continues to be a lot of advances in, say, drug discovery that then transfer over into cosmetics as an emerging area. So like nanotechnology, in terms of how, different capsules actually improve efficiencies and are faster acting in terms of performance. And we think about how nanotechnology has really helped us with sunscreens in terms of the inorganic sunscreen world. And now there's all these creations of these engineered nanomaterials where there's, say, zinc oxide combined with vitamin C, a Vitabrid nanocapsule, which can help deliver amazing benefits to somebody with barrier issues. So I think there continues to be advances in the microbiome and nanotechnology that from drug delivery too, that will help us in cosmetic science. So it's a wonderful world to be in today's day and age for skin and trying to address skin health issues.
Fascinating. Very interesting. Ava, what are your thoughts on the future predictions here?
My answer is very similar to Penny's. Took the words almost right out of my mouth, but definitely want to expand more so on the ingredient side. We're obviously going to continue to see more innovations in cosmetic ingredients in general, incorporating biotechnology and the microbiome as well. However, I don't think we necessarily have a full grasp on what that means quite yet. And I think that's definitely an area for research. Like I've seen some products already out on the market that says, helps support your microbiome, or even for the biotechnology side that it's going to reverse aging. So we're starting to, kind of cater a little bit into the drug side without necessarily knowing what that means yet. But I definitely do think that that is an area of interest in the industry in general, is, figuring how to strip down to the very basics and how to prevent things like aging from happening even in the first place. And, like I said, a big area of interest.
Fascinating. Stephanie, what are your views?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really great to see where we're trending already. Like, it seems like all of those little formulation issues that have been, recurring the past 20 years are starting to, have solutions. Like, for example, as we mentioned, the nanoparticles for sunscreen to reduce the white cast. That has been a really huge help in the sunscreen industry. And actually at a suppliers day, I went this past week, and Evonik was presenting a vitamin C that is bound to gold particles in order to stabilize it. And vitamin C stabilization has been a recurring issue for years and years and years. So it was really interesting to see that, and you can use it at a lower percentage, so it matches the activity of, a 10% vitamin C situation. So it's really great to see that we're starting to solve all of these formulation issues through ingredients. Now all that we really need is just a universal definition for sustainability and green and clean, and we'll be good to go.
You got to get everyone to agree on that, but yes, that's a fair point. All right.
So just one thought, when you talk about cosmetic science, people generally think about color cosmetics and superficial type of materials there. Yeah. One of the points I always emphasize is that it's about health, hygiene, and beauty. It's not just this thing. The significant health component to it in terms of preventing disease, in terms of protecting the barrier, in terms of preventing AD, for example, or making sure that the elderly skin is properly protected and so on, yeah, or protecting skin from sun damage and things like that. It's a significant health care component to it and hygiene component to it. We came out of pandemic, just a couple of years ago, and we were all washing our hands 20 times a day and so on. Yeah. Again, the importance of managing the microbiome, managing the skin barrier, and ensuring protection from germs and everything else becomes very, very important. Yeah. So look at cosmetic science as a much broader thing, as a health, hygiene, and beauty science.
Great point. I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this discussion. I think it was very fascinating. I really appreciate your insights today. So thank you, Professor Ananth, Penny, Ava, and Stephanie for joining us today. This has been very insightful.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Mm-hmm.